Microsoft. They're claiming that they're trying to merge them in Windows 8. They're lying. They're not.
Here is something nobody tells you when you sit down at your computer. You might not own it anymore, not the machine, not the software, not even the experience of using it. And the scariest part, it did not happen overnight. It happened slowly, quietly, update by update, terms of service change by terms of service change, until one day the computer sitting on your desk started working more for the company that made the software than for you. Now here is the thing that makes this story genuinely wild. There was one person who saw all of this coming, more than 20 years ago, and nobody listened to him. His name is Linus Torvalds. He created Linux, and for most of his career, the world treated him like an angry nerd with a grudge who just could not let things go. But today, everything he warned about is not a prediction anymore. It is a product roadmap. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how a company goes from calling open source software a cancer to pretending to love it, and why that flip should worry you far more than the original hostility ever did. Stay with me, because the way this story unfolds is not what you expect. To understand where we are today, you have to go back to a moment when Microsoft was not pretending. Late 1990s, early 2000s. Internal company memos start leaking to the public. These documents, later known as the Halloween documents, showed Microsoft executives studying open source software not as a curiosity, but as a serious threat to their entire business model. And what was their strategy to fight it? Not better products, not lower prices, not smarter engineering. Fear, uncertainty, doubt, spread confusion, make customers nervous, slow adoption down without ever having to win a fair technical fight. Then the CEO at the time, Steve Ballmer, stepped in front of cameras and said something that removed all remaining doubt. He called Linux a cancer. Not a competitor, not a challenge, a cancer. Something that spreads and contaminates everything it touches. Now think about what that word choice reveals. You do not use the word cancer for something you plan to compete with fairly. You use it for something you want people to be afraid of. You use it for something you want eliminated. And Linus Torvalds noticed. He pushed back, sometimes bluntly. But his core argument was actually very simple. Open development, where regular people can read, study, and change the code that runs their machines, is a kind of immune system for the technology world. It keeps any single company from quietly taking over something everyone depends on. And here is where it gets interesting, because Torvalds was not some reckless revolutionary. He even said publicly that blind Microsoft hatred was a disease. He acknowledged they could write good code when they wanted to. His concern was something more specific and much more dangerous. He believed that Microsoft would always do whatever kept them in control of platforms, regardless of how friendly they sounded in any given moment. That distinction matters enormously, and you are about to see exactly why. So here is where the story takes its strangest turn. Around the mid-2000s, everything appeared to change. Microsoft got a new CEO. The company started contributing code to Linux. They launched campaigns with slogans like Microsoft loves Linux. They built tools to run Linux software inside Windows. They put Linux workloads front and center on their cloud platform. The company that once called Linux a cancer was now sending it flowers. And the tech world largely said, okay, fair enough. People change. Companies change. Maybe they mean it. Then came the move that made everyone pick a side. Microsoft bought GitHub. If you are not a developer, here is why that matters. GitHub is not just a website. It is the largest public platform on Earth where programmers store, share, and build software together. Millions of open source projects live there. It is where collaborative development actually happens at scale. And overnight, it belonged to the same company that had spent years trying to slow open source adoption. Microsoft promised GitHub would remain independent. They promised it would respect licenses. They promised the community was safe. And here is the open loop I want you to hold in your mind for the next few minutes. What does a company actually need to do to control a platform? Does it need to ban things, block projects, shut communities down? Or does it just need to be the one who sets the defaults, owns the infrastructure, and decides which features get built? We are going to come back to that question because the answer shows up everywhere, and it is more unsettling than any ban could ever be. Let us talk about GitHub Copilot. This is an AI tool that helps programmers write code. You type a little, it suggests the rest. It is genuinely useful. Millions of developers use it every day. Here is how it was built. It was trained on enormous amounts of public code that thousands of developers and companies had published on GitHub under specific open source licenses. Licenses that say very clearly, you can use this, but you have to follow certain rules. You have to give credit. You have to preserve copyright notices. Critics argued that Copilot can sometimes reproduce code in ways that look very close to the original without telling you where it came from and without carrying forward any of the obligations attached to it. The legal fights over this are still happening in courts right now, but set the legal argument aside for a second and look at what the pattern actually describes. Thousands of volunteers, hobbyists, researchers, and companies spend years writing and sharing software under specific rules that are supposed to protect collective ownership. Then a corporation takes all of that work, feeds it into a closed AI model, sells access to that model as a paid subscription, and does not automatically point users back to the communities and projects where the original work came from. Think about what that dynamic creates over time. Open source developers are not just losing credit. They risk becoming unpaid data suppliers for a commercial AI industry while the value flows upward to the company controlling the model. And now hold that thought, because what happened with Copilot and developers is actually just a preview of something that affects every single person who uses a Windows computer. The same logic just gets applied one layer higher. Most people do not notice when control changes, because control changes feel like updates. Over the last decade, Windows has quietly become more of a managed experience and less of a tool you fully own. System telemetry, the data your machine sends back to Microsoft about how you use it, became harder to turn off completely in standard editions. Default settings started steering users toward Microsoft's own browser, cloud storage, and search engine. And those defaults had a habit of coming back after updates, even when you had turned them off. When Windows 11 arrived, it came packaged with new hardware requirements, trusted platform module, secure boot, an online account to finish setup. Microsoft said these were for security, and maybe some of them were. But notice the direction. Every generation of Windows hands the vendor slightly more control over who can run the system, under what conditions, and with which services connected. Then came something that brought everything into sharp, uncomfortable focus. It is called Recall. Recall is a Windows feature that takes regular screenshots of your screen and stores them so an AI can help you search everything you have ever seen on your device. The sales pitch is pure convenience. Imagine being able to find anything, any website, any document, any message, just by describing it. The reality that security researchers pointed out almost immediately was this. You are also building the most detailed log of your digital life that has ever existed. Every website you visit, every document you open, every conversation you have, every financial record, medical search, and private message, stored, indexed, searchable. And in early versions, that data was stored in ways that malware or a local attacker could access with relative ease. Microsoft delayed the rollout, added protections, made it opt-in. Supporters said that proved the company could respond and correct course. But here is the thing critics keep pointing back to. The feature was designed and built in the first place. Someone looked at the idea of screenshotting everything you do and said, yes, let us ship this. The controversy did not reveal a mistake in the engineering. It revealed an assumption about what a computer is for. And opt-in settings have a long history of drifting toward aggressive defaults over time. Here is where Linus Torvalds was most right, and also where most people missed what he was actually saying. When people argued about Linux versus Windows in the 1990s, they were arguing about the operating system, the thing that boots your machine, manages your files, runs your programs. That battle mattered then. Today, that battle is almost irrelevant because the operating system is no longer where control lives. Control lives in the cloud platform that hosts your apps, the AI service that processes your data, the account that ties your phone, laptop, and work tools together, the developer platform where code is discovered and built. You can run Linux on your laptop right now and still depend entirely on proprietary cloud services for your work, your communication, and your storage. You are technically free at the kernel level and practically locked in at every level that matters for daily life. This is the move Torvalds was warning about long before the words cloud computing or AI assistant existed. A company does not need to own the floor to control the building. It needs to own the elevator. And right now, Microsoft owns a significant share of the elevator. Azure runs a massive portion of the internet's infrastructure. GitHub is where most public code lives. Copilot is embedded in development workflows. Teams is the default communication layer for enormous chunks of the corporate world. And Windows, even with all its drift toward managed experiences, remains the operating system on the majority of the world's personal computers. None of that is illegal. None of it is even necessarily malicious in any single moment, but the economic logic that drives those systems has a direction. And that direction is not toward more user control. Every time more of your computing moves to their servers, under their policies, processed through their identity systems, the cost of saying no to anything they change gets slightly higher. You are not choosing between browsers. You are deciding whether to break your workflow, your team's workflow, your company's workflow. That is a very different kind of lock-in. And it is far more durable than anything that came before. Let us be honest about something. Everything Microsoft is building is genuinely useful. GitHub is a better development platform than most alternatives. Azure is powerful and reliable. Copilot saves developers real time. Teams keeps remote teams connected. Even Recall, if you trust the company and the security model, is a genuinely interesting idea. This is not a story about evil for the sake of evil. Corporations do not need to be evil to erode your autonomy. They just need to be optimizing for something other than your freedom. The problem with convenience is that it has a price that is not listed on the receipt. A feature that used to run locally now requires a cloud connection. A tool that was free becomes part of a subscription. A setting you turned off comes back after an update. Each individual change is small. Each one has a reasonable sounding explanation, but look at the cumulative direction. Your computer used to be a tool that did what you told it. Today, it is increasingly a portal to services that operate under someone else's terms. And those terms can change at any time, without your negotiation, without your vote, and sometimes without even a meaningful notice. For developers, there is an additional layer to this that is worth paying attention to. If the main place where code is discovered, discussed, and increasingly written is owned by a single corporation, that corporation does not need to shut anything down. It can simply shape the environment so that the most convenient path is the one that keeps everything inside its ecosystem. An AI tool that gives you instant suggestions pulls your attention away from the original projects those suggestions came from. Fewer people browse repositories. Fewer people join mailing lists. Fewer contributors learn the culture of collaborative development. The code keeps flowing. But the sense of shared ownership starts to fade. The community becomes background fuel for products it did not ask to power. And here is the quiet possibility that nobody talks about loudly. Transparency can improve at the exact same time that exposure grows. Companies can add better dashboards, clearer privacy settings, and more opt-in controls, while simultaneously expanding what their systems see and process on your device and in their cloud. Better-looking privacy controls and broader data collection are not opposites. They can exist side by side. And that is a more sophisticated version of the same problem Torvalds identified decades ago. Let us not pretend that individual choices will dismantle corporate infrastructure. They will not. But there is a difference between powerless and practically invisible. And most people right now are invisible to this problem because nobody framed it clearly for them. So here is the frame. You do not have to be a developer or a tech expert to make choices that slow down the default slide. You just have to start paying attention to a few things that usually get buried in fine print and product announcements. Where does your data actually live? Is it on hardware you control or on servers run by a company whose interests are not identical to yours? What happens to your workflow if a service changes its pricing, its terms, or its feature set? Can you move, or are you stuck? Are the defaults on your devices set to maximize your control or to maximize the vendor's visibility into your behavior? These are not technical questions. They are strategic ones. And they are exactly the kind of questions that open source philosophy was built to ask. The people who choose Linux, who self-host services, who pay attention to licenses and standards, are not winning some ideological war, but they are keeping alternatives alive. They are demonstrating that a different model is possible, and they are building the infrastructure that gives everyone else a fallback when the convenient path becomes unacceptable. That is not nothing. That is actually everything in a world where defaults shape behavior for billions of people. So let us bring this home. Was Linus Torvalds right about Microsoft? Not in every detail, not in every prediction. Companies are complex, and the people inside them are not monolithic. Microsoft has shipped genuinely good open source contributions. It has corrected real mistakes. It has occasionally surprised even its harshest critics. But the structural argument he was making was not really about Microsoft as a company made of individuals. It was about what a large corporation, answerable to shareholders and driven by growth targets, will tend to do when it encounters an ecosystem built on shared ownership and collective control. It will embrace that ecosystem when ignoring it becomes too costly. It will extend its reach into that ecosystem once it is inside. And it will gradually reshape the environment until real alternatives are still technically available, but practically require more effort than most people are willing to spend. That is not pessimism. That is just an accurate description of how platform power accumulates over time. And here is the most uncomfortable conclusion of all. The endgame that Torvalds spent his career resisting does not look like a ban or a shutdown or a hostile acquisition. It looks like a beautiful, fast, AI-assisted operating system that runs your apps, learns your habits, connects your devices, and makes everything feel seamless and effortless. It looks like the most convenient thing you have ever used. And deep in the background, quietly, it is processing everything you do, tying it to an identity you cannot fully separate from, and making each exit slightly more expensive than the last. You can still choose differently. The door is not locked, but every year it gets a little heavier. That is what Linus Torvalds was right about, and that is why this story is not about the past. It is about the next update sitting in your queue right now.